Hey, peace and blessings, family. Welcome to Sunday Sitting with Sisters.
Good morning.
Hello, good morning.
Dana Maisha's back with us.
Good morning, family. Good love.
So we have some awesome guests today, and we're going to be talking a little bit about history, Juneteenth, freedom, liberation, the whole nine. I'm especially excited because we're joined by some awesome women who are definitely working every day in our communities. And we have, because I have my little script here, we have Sister Faye Kennedy, who is a community elder and an activist. She does a lot of stuff. I mean, I was trying to research some stuff on you to other than what I know.
Mm-hmm.
And this came up for me was the activism. You do a lot. You do work with the Poor People Campaign.
Yes,
You also do stuff with Women's Health Leadership. Like you do stuff across the whole board. So we have her. We have Sister Genoa Barrows, who's a senior staff writer and calendar events editor for the Sacramento Observer newspaper. And she is also the author of a book, the editor-in-chief of Daddy's Issues, Black Women Speaking Truth and Healing Wounds. I have a copy of that book.
Yes, yes.
And then we also have Mama Michelle Strongfield, and she is out of my hometown of Philly.
Yes, yes.
She's the managing director and founder of the I Am Science Education.
Oh, wow.
And this is where they create in response to the numbers of African American youth engaged in pursuing science, technology, engineering, and math, the STEMs. And so we have her, but she's also an activist and just all around. I think we first met each other in Cuba.
Oh, wow.
Correct? I remember. Yes. So y'all, thank y'all for joining with us today. I'm looking forward to this conversation. As you can tell, I'm pretty excited. Because anytime we talk history, I just get excited because I learn more about myself. I get a chance to have more of a clear understanding of what's really going on and what I'm looking at and what I'm facing more than anything else. Mm-hmm. So as I asked you all over the last week, did anything in particular come to mind for you all with all that has happened with the marches and the rallying and all of that kind of stuff? Anything come to y'all to mind for you all?
Well, for me, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
So for me, I was glad people were out in the street marching, exercising their constitutional right, but people still wanted to focus on the negative. Folks act like they don't understand why people were doing certain things, that we still put property over human life. You had mayors, you had governors, you had even some community members talking about they can't tear up. Very few was talking about that for almost 9 minutes, this person laid on the neck of another human being, that we have to begin to look at a human being lost their life, that human beings are dying at the hands of folks who are supposed to protect and serve us as individuals and as a community. And that although the focus was on Mr. Floyd, but we need to begin to shift the focus and talk about when Black women lose their lives and Black girls are raped and disrespected. So I was struck by that narrative. And we got to talk about humans and not property.
Something that was greatly encouraging to me personally was, millennials catch such a bad rap. They just catch all kinds of, and in many ways, people in my generation don't accept responsibility that they are who they are because we must have fallen down on our job in some way. So I was greatly encouraged to see so many young people out there. There was a lot of commentary about them being undisciplined but that's because, again, we allowed them to be undisciplined. We didn't step in at some strategic times. And now I don't know if it's too late. I don't know if they'll listen at this point to us. I don't know, but I still try. But I have to say, I am so happy for their energy and so now maybe this is an opportunity for us to, if they'll allow us, to offer some guidance and share some insights. I don't want to talk too long, but I know that as a young kid on the west side of Chicago, the teenagers in my life, the older teenagers, and some of them were returning from the war in Vietnam. That's time frame. But those were the kids. Those teenagers we looked up to took us and took us up the block and had us packing groceries. We didn't know we were packing groceries for the Panther breakfast program. We didn't know. Our parents were frightened, but because they were the neighborhood kids, they allowed us. I say this to give an example of how older folks need to grab these younger people and channel them in ways, not lecture them, not finger wag, but we can have an impact. And maybe if it's not too late, we can still have some impact on these young people out in the street.
I think it's important. Like I said, I think it's important. Rolanda said, we don't understand our history. Some folks don't understand history, don't know the history. And I think it's important for older generations to share that and impart that, even when, sometimes the door isn't open to that. But I'll say, I just learned last month that my uncle participated in the breakfast program with the Panthers in West Oakland back in the day. I never knew that. I mean, because he never shared that with me. We were having a conversation last month, and he showed me he still has like issues of the Panther newspaper. From the 70s that he was keeping for his children. I mean, he never shared that. So it's important for us to share those stories, the action and activism that the older ones had when they were called to action, whether it's protest in the street or protest in your own neighborhood. And I think in some ways that breakfast program back in the day was a protest, and what came out of that was the school systems basically taking that idea because it hadn't happened before, and that was the Black Panthers saying, hey, our kids matter. We're going to feed these children so they're ready to learn. And so that model was then, widened. And so, but a lot of people don't give credit to that. And I think out of what's coming now must be action, after the action. And so then our communities are made better.
Right on.
But you got to know your stuff. That they're when you say standing on the shoulders of others, it's like those actions. And the young people are teaching us how to how a new way. But that new way was predicated by
No way.
some history.
I think it's really refreshing to hear older people or more mature and wise people take this perspective, because a lot of the conversations that I've been having over the past couple of weeks has been kind of like defending young people, because like you say, even our own people, they only focus on the property and they damage, and they focus on the rioting and looting, whereas we know that most of the young people, at least most of the young people I know, they're not doing that. They are civically engaged in the process and really wanting to affect the change. And one of the things that I always stay humble when I'm speaking, of course, to my elders, but also with the young people, because I have to take responsibility. They're trying to correct something that for sure Generation X wasn't able to fix. You get what I'm saying? So at the bare minimum, we need to support them.
Right on. With that being said, I think the interesting thing to know is that the other side, their young people have enough room where they can be all things.
Mhm.
I think sometimes putting all the young people in the same bucket is just as dangerous when we put all of ourselves in the same bucket. Because in every era that I know of, there's always been people fighting.
Mhm.
Always. I don't know no generation that did not fight, including the exes. I mean, some people aren't here anymore because they did all the fighting and nobody else was there to pick up the slack when they were fighting. So I think you got to be very careful, you know, when we do the all comment, because all young people, some young people was at home finishing up their school so they can graduate. Some
Right.
young people was home babysitting because their parents had to go to work.
Mhm.
You know, some people didn't have a choice but to be on the street because they had no place to go. So I think that, and part of making us human means that we got to consider all of those other factors and all of those other different kind of people. I also know that as you're young, you're getting older by the minute.
Mhm.
And so I know some people who are in their 50s who don't know half the things that some of the young people know that are in their 20s.
Mhm.
And so I've been having conversation with a few older people who don't know half the stuff that I thought that they knew. And so I can't like blame them for something that they didn't have. That's sometimes that's such a hard kind of concept, but it's hard to put the blame on people who don't even know. They don't even know. They can't even help you because they didn't know.
Right.
They
Right.
really didn't. So when to Faye Kennedy and Mama Michelle, when you all were young, what were some of the issues that your communities faced? And do you see those issues right now?
So for me, I'm a little my experience may be a little different. I did not come to Sacramento, California until I was about the summer of 1963. So prior to that, I lived in Alabama, in Mobile, in a totally segregated community where when you see the signs that said colored and white, I saw those signs. I lived in an all segregated community, an all black school. Um, so my experience was a lot different from a lot of people. It wasn't until I came to Sacramento, we lived in Oak Park the first year, that I actually went to an integrated school, that I actually saw people who we would call Latinos, who I thought were Native American or indigenous, because back there was only black folks and white folks, and they were Native Americans. So my experience was very, very different. My parents were petrified because people had talked about the education in California was so much higher. So they thought I was going to be behind, and it was the complete opposite. I actually excelled. Um, I was much more self-confident than most of my peers, black or white or any of them. Um, and that I had a very supportive home life. Uh, my parents really supported me. I have an older sister who's now deceased. So my life was probably a little bit different. Um, but what I do remember, what drove my parents to leave was the bombing in Birmingham. I grew up not knowing it was called Birmingham because we call it Bombingham, because Black folks were being terrorized on a daily basis. And so my father's job provided him an opportunity to leave. They their first choice was either California or Texas, and they chose Sacramento because of UC Davis and Sac State. And I ended up graduating from Sac State in in the mid 70s. So yeah, yeah.
What about you, sister? Mama
So
Michelle?
how about this for full circle? I was thinking about this while you were speaking, sis. You're from the deep South, of course.
Deep South.
My family is Mississippi, Alabama,
Okay.
but they in the migration they moved to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
So as an infant to about 6 years old, we lived on the south, what is called Hyde Park in Chicago.
Oh yes. Uh-huh.
But because of gentrification, the University of Chicago pulled our building down, displaced us. We had to go to the west side.
Mm-hmm.
We go to the west side, and because of redlining, black folks in Chicago and white people just fled,
Mm-hmm.
just fled. So we were there on the west side. you know, and so you know all the stories about Chicago, but that's not the community I grew up in. It was, like you said, supportive and whatever. Fast forward to going to university in Boston, and there's busing going on. And white folks are bananas. They're throwing, this is like the 50s repeat. White folks are fighting teenagers and kids who are trying to go to high school, you know, try to integrate a high school. This is 30 years after Brown versus the Board of Education. This is in Boston. Then fast forward to my move to Philadelphia, I moved to a city where the police chief is named Rizzo.
Okay.
He takes Black Panthers out of their home, but bust them naked, and throws them up against the wall and photographs them. This is the same city that bombed, moved, killed 11 men, women, and children. You know, and so now here we are again. Now I'm also right now in a neighborhood that is being rapidly gentrified. They're trying to get me out of here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just saying how this life has gone full circle from one set of circumstances that I knew nothing about as an infant to now as an adult, this old lady watching these events transpire that I could share with people if they, you know, if they're open to hear it. I'm glad to be here today so I can just play these events out and share them with you all. But it is an interesting, but now we have a different, we have tactics now, we have strategy. They're not moving us out without us, you know, some pushback. You know, the things that are happening to the brothers that got, you know, of course, we saw brothers mowed down the street. Fred Hampton used to come around the neighborhood with the folks that
teach
groceries. When he died, when he was murdered, it was on Madison Street, 2 blocks away from where I live. The Panthers had tours. They would take young kids and adults, whoever wanted to go, to see where the cops had committed that atrocious crime on Fred and his family, Mark Clark. We were able to roam inside that building until they put more barriers up. Then the barriers got torn down and we went in again. I mean, little kids, you know, adolescents. So I'm excited to see that this same kind of energy is maybe being restored. I hope that it is. I hope that we fell victim to the pacification programs of the 70s. You remember that, sis? There were some, you know, programs that they threw up here and programs there, and some politicians were bought off and paid for. And so we were quieted down. So I'm hoping that we don't fall for that once again.
Right on.
You know, we always have to keep our eyes open. Yes. I got my eye on a couple people right now. Like, I'm not take that much.
Right on.
Notes.
So, Mama Michelle, you just said a whole bunch of stuff.
I'm sorry.
No. That's the beauty of it. You basically gave us a timeline. And the timeline is what the young people and other people don't know about. Like you spoke that, like we should know it. We should know it. But we don't. Most of us don't. I know who Fred Hampton is. Every year we go to road trip, we go by the house. We meet his son take us to all the prominent spots. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? In Chicago, but most people don't even know who he is. Most of them don't even understand what redlining is. Most of us don't understand, really. We just started learning the word gentrification. But before that, they probably called it something else. But if you don't tell people the history, they don't even know it when it's coming. Because your opposition never changes its playbook because it's effective. You never change.
It was called urban renewal. You remember that?
Yeah, like urban renewal. I can't remember what it was.
Yes. Jackson said urban renewal equal nigger removal. I don't use it. I don't use it myself, but
that is so real, though.
That's what it was.
So let me ask. So in the 70s, let's just go right to the 70s for just a minute. What was happening in the 70s? What was really, and I remember, I'm a 70s baby, so for some reason I'm wedded to the 70s. I watch 70 movies, I listen to 70 music. I mean, for my sister's on here, she probably like, yes. You know what I mean? She watched another, you know. But to me, the 70s as a child was beautiful, seeing Black people calling each other sisters and brothers. I remember that energy, to be honest.
The big froze.
I remember the froze, and just I'm from North Philly, so that's what I remembered. I remember us being so tight. But I also know that was just what I see. But you know, as things are moving along, there are other plans in the work to divide, to break that apart. What was happening that we maybe did not see?
I think it depends on what part of the country you lived in. And I think Michelle did a great job of providing some historical context. So you saw probably the emergence at the latter part of the 60s, the beginning of the 70s, where you saw Black folks able to say, I'm Black and I'm proud, and it began to express themselves of their beauty, no matter what color was their skin tone. But we also knew going on in our community that there were still issues around colorism, because although I'm brown skinned, my sister, who's now deceased, was considered high yellow, and what that meant and its implication. We also saw probably the largest number of Black folks entering into institutions of higher learning that were not necessarily Black institutions. So you begin to see Black folks going to other institutions of higher learning. You saw that. You saw the beginnings of many of us, our parents' generation, the Black middle class beginning to emerge because they were able to go to college, because they were able to get government jobs or jobs in private companies where we were not allowed to work in private company or government jobs at the professional level. We were working in those jobs, but we were not in professional level jobs earning top money. So you begin to see all of that. You begin to see, I think Michelle began to talk about it, how a lot of our leaders were beginning, not to say they weren't bought off years ago, but you begin to see how that money became really a wedge. And you begin to see a lot of us moving out of our communities because we could. We were no longer restricted to live in, I'm going to use Sacramento. We were no longer restricted to live in just Oak Park. In the 70s, what people don't realize, in Sacramento, Meadowview was considered middle class. It's where middle class people who got an opportunity to leave Oak Park to go to Meadowview or on Florin Road. When I was at Kennedy High School in the 70s, that's where middle class Black people lived. They lived either in what we call the Meadowview Florin area or the Green Haven area. It's not what we think about today. And then we need to talk about why Meadowview went down. When the city and county began to disinvest in the Meadowview area, or the Oak Park area, or the Elder Creek area, when they do that purposely, they claim they didn't do it purposely. But when they begin to disinvest funds and resources, you're going to see it happen.
I wanted to kind of maybe leapfrog ahead. I think because a lot of the things that you said, sis, are, a lot of the superficial things, the big hair, the Black is beautiful, was fantastic. But on many levels, it was superficial. It didn't go deep. Because I remember as by this time I had children, young children. I'm looking for a way to educate them that doesn't, colonize their brains. We were involved with the Council of Independent Black Institutions. And so there were schools all over the country. But I remember hearing young people, college age people, again, who didn't turn to HBCUs because they didn't have to. The PWIs were open and available to them. I remember being astounded to hear many of, like, maybe my younger siblings, peers, say things like, "It's not about Black, it's about green." And I was like, what? What are you saying? And they would have this deep analysis about that, Black people got to get this economic, we got to get our money right. But I get that, and I agree with that, because you can't build an institution without money. You can't build institutions. But those comments often were devoid of any real connection to being an African person in this situation, in this place. And that used to freak me out a lot. And I see its continuity, like with the Thomas Sowell and I can't pull the other names out of my brain right now. But when the 70s turned into 80s and Richard Nixon and then, George Bush had groups of Negroes who were buying wholesale into this thing that it's about the economy. If we'll be all right if we just make money. If we just have things, we'll be okay. And we haven't quite recovered from that, I don't think.
Wow.
I grew up.
That was superficial analysis.
No.
I wanted to give it the quick and dirty.
I felt that.
I was going to say, I was born in the 70s.
Okay.
And I grew up in West Oakland. And we lived in the projects. There wasn't anything middle class about that. And it was predominantly, I would say 99%, Black people. The only time you saw white people were at schools with teachers, or when the welfare lady came to your house, or the police came to your block. And a lot of times those three situations weren't necessarily positive. Even as we were kids, we would say, oh, the teacher doesn't like us. We're doing this and we're doing that. It wasn't until later that we learned that there are some that have, biases to begin with. But here they are teaching, Black children, charged with, our futures, our learning. And again, those weren't positive, situations with, discipline. When you say now, when you talk about, disproportionate numbers of students getting suspended, but that was our reality, because most of the kids were Black. So it wasn't any disproportion, it just was. But as kids, nobody listened to us. But our parents, if you had, strong parents, there were situations where my mom would come down to the school and say, you know what? No, if my baby said she didn't do this, she didn't do it. I believe her. And there were times when, you had to speak up to, the worker that came. You mentioned movies from back in the day. One of my favorite movies is Claudine.
Oh yeah, yes.
There's a scene where the welfare worker came and they hid all the things, that they weren't supposed to have when they were on welfare. I remember we did some of that. But also when you look at it, and the things that James Earl Jones was saying, you're not supposed to have a man. The separation of, the family and the tearing down of the family just because you happen to be poor. So I don't know. It wasn't until later that, I realized a lot of things we talked about. I talked about, the Panthers. We saw some of, I would see Huey P. Newton, but at the end of the 70s, what we saw was what we learned later to be the tearing down of the Panthers. What happened to them after these, we use the word dismantle, after these institutions that were, working to bring some pride to us were dismantled for that exact reason. And so it wasn't until later, until we started to, come into, who we were as teens or as adults, that we learned some of these institutions that were working. And I say institutions, meaning Black Panthers, some other activists that were working for our betterment, and they were stripped. Really. And so I say, in a way, stripped of the knowledge, because all we saw at the end was some things that weren't necessarily the greatest out of these individuals. But then you learn why that ended up being that way. And so I learned that the part that I grew up, the part that I was born across from, was the Infirmary Park. Other people, it was renamed Little Bobby Hutton Park. Didn't know that until, years later. And there was a chapter here, and the gentleman, Billy Jennings, Billy X, he started, as I'm, as you said, I work for a Black newspaper. And so some of those things, we began, talking about. And so I thought, I never knew that, even though I grew up right there. I was born literally across the street from Infirmary Park. And so I think, again, the history, the historians that have the knowledge, sometimes it's been beaten out of them, but you still have to, educate. So then we know where, from whence we came. And so it's a rich history.
Did that impact you at all working at a Black newspaper as you begin to find those things out?
Well, of course. And I always say, where I came from impacted, who I am, because I wouldn't be who I am if not having gone through these things. And so working for a Black newspaper, I do believe that we are historians. Knowing things, bringing stories to light that other people don't feel is important. Our history. I recently had the opportunity to go back, and like I said, I didn't grow up in Sacramento, but I've worked for the Observer, the Sacramento Observer, for it'll be 21 years next month.
Oh my God.
And so it's a long time. And so that speaks to a dedication in itself. But I recently had the opportunity to go back and they have the archives at the Central Library downtown, right? Where some of the protests went past. And they have the archives of the Observer there back from day one, when it was called something else at the time, and then it evolved into what's the Sacramento Observer. But it gave me a chance to see how things were, what was of importance then. And some people say, oh, the paper's bougie, this and that. It's only a certain sector. That's not true. But they were covering Angela Davis. They were covering some of the, they talk about the gentrification. I've talked to women who started the WCIC, or, were young at the time when WCIC, Women's Improvement. Thank you. And so, but they were talking about, how there were certain areas where Black women could be, and women coming in, young women coming, nurses, teachers, in some degrees, they would come and they were told, oh, they couldn't stay in this area, or they would go and apply for, an apartment here, and they couldn't. But some of the areas where they were coming were like, they were like, I guess sometimes they call it red light district. They weren't safe areas. And so WCIC, came out of that and was trying to, help, in some of those things. And so that was covered in the paper back in the day. And you could see, if you go back and look at the archives, what was important, what was going on, who else was telling the stories, if not for us. And I think that's still the case, obviously. And so sometimes, when you see, oh, okay, we cover birthdays, we cover, sometimes, death notices, which we don't charge for, by the way. Mainstream press does. But anyway, and so there's things that people, say, oh, why you do this and do this. And one of our photographers, Larry Dalton, said, because in another way, that's also the pictures are a history. But he was saying, it shows us, how we live, how we celebrate, how we mourn. You know what I mean? How we are a resilient people. We go through things, right? And so it's like what was important to us, and we keep saying that the history, things repeating themselves. We've been here before.
Right on.
You know what I mean? And there's light after that. You know what I mean? And this is how we got through this. So it is a blueprint, really, of our lives. And that's what keeps me as a member of the Black press. I mean, we have issues. I mean, you've seen, during, these protests, journalists being arrested on camera, people being roused, their credentials being questioned. We get that. We get that on a regular basis. Sometimes we do it to ourselves because we don't value different things. And so we keep at it because the story has to be told. If we don't, like I said, we don't tell it. You mentioned, in Chicago Defender, there are small newspapers, across the country that people still haven't heard of. Sometimes in your own community, the Observer's been around almost 60 years, and people still say, "Oh, I didn't know," and there's work that we have to do, and there's work that the community has to do too, because you see it. I mean, if you don't value it or you don't know it exists, but when you come to a town, I have people all the time say, "Oh, I just moved to town. Where do I find this? And where do we find this?" Or I'm looking for a Black photographer to do this. Do you know any? So I think that's the beauty of people seek it. And so I think if you're a Black person, you live in a town, there's nothing wrong with, doing your research. I Google everything. So if I go, it's like Google it and find out if there's a Black newspaper.
Right.
Not just when you're in.
Right on. I will say this: every year when I'm in Chicago, for several times we had the opportunity to go to the Chicago Defender. And for some of my girls, that was the first time they ever seen actual photographs of Emmett Till. No idea who Emmett Till was. We kept passing that street in Chicago that is named for Emmett Till. And then, they was like, "Who is that?" And I was like, "We don't know about him later on." And we went to the Chicago. They had so much on the history. Like, it was just incredible. So there was some young people being downloaded with that information. But that's the part of sharing.
Yeah. And the reality is, when they say, "Oh, the revolution won't be televised," it's like it has been. Has folks listened? When the civil rights movement, when they showing people, officers with dogs and water hose sticking dogs on children, it wasn't until then that people outside, we had already been saying this stuff has happened to us. You know what I'm saying? But when other people started seeing that, that's when change. You're like, wow. A dog on the child. You know what I mean? This is a woman, dressed like she going to church. And it's like you stick a dog on them. I mean, you train a dog to go after. You know what I mean? Once people started seeing that, they said, "Wait a minute." Just like now, when people started seeing, it's like, "Wait a minute, I didn't know," because I didn't have to. I didn't know that this was going on. I mean, sometimes you could say, "Okay, it's been going on. It's not the first time your head was buried in the sand." Yeah, but when you're insulated, you know what I mean. You don't have to. It's comfortable not to, whether that's Black or otherwise. It's comfortable not to know these things, right? And so once somebody starts showing it to you, and I was like, now you're starting to see, the real, not just the surface, but like, I mean, how can you not see a child shot in the face and think, what's going on here? How can you see a man with a knee on his neck calling out for his mama and not see that that's wrong? And so the telling of the stories, whether it's newspaper, whether it's somebody going with a cell phone camera, it's like showing, man, it's real.
Right on. Sister Chris Ann is saying that there's a lot of echoing, and I hear it too. So I know I have another device that's on mute. But if you're playing a device, that's what could be doing the echoing. I'm not sure. Or sometimes you could just mute yourself when you're not talking, because that would help. Is that what it was? It was you? No, I'm just messing around. So the next thing, Mama Michelle, you talked about identity. And so when I mentioned the 70s and I talked about seeing those things, one of the things I'm very aware of is that for a lot of Black folks, they didn't know who they really were. They were discovering. I would never think for them to be deep. It's like trying to make a baby deep, but the baby just got here. What I remember the most about the 70s is a lot of Black people were just discovering that they were from Africa. That in itself is heavy in itself.
Yeah,
it's heavy, and it's like the latest. It's like I remember when everybody started wearing locks. The people who I know wore locks, it had a whole other meaning before it became fashionable. Because now you don't even have to get locks. You can just buy some stuff that look like locks and throw it in your hair. But I mean, I just feel like identity is somehow it keeps coming back to identity. And I think that's where we kind of get stuck at, where it's like trying to wait for us to agree on what identity is. I think so. That's why I jumped all the way to the human aspect of it. To at least bring people along as much as I can. But there is something about identity when it comes to us here in the U.S. that there's a struggle there somehow. Yeah. There's a real struggle in identity. I don't know. I'm throwing that out there. Do y'all possibly see that with us in terms of identity and struggle?
I do, if I can interject here.
Please, I'm gonna shut my window because the garden's here. Go ahead.
I see it in little children still to this day. I had a conversation with one of my family members, if you can believe it, and she was telling me that she was white. And literally, I found myself going back and forth with this little girl and understanding that I have to understand for myself that I need to be talking to her mom. I need to be talking to her parents. But yeah, I see lots of issues, identity issues amongst us.
Can I say, I did by mine, but I'm okay with that. I know who I am.
No, and that's okay. That's part of what makes us all unique. We all have different styles. Look, I gotta press. You know, this ain't my. I'm gonna have to press it. This is not. You know. But I think that it's a difference when you're really clear about being a Black woman, and to see little children struggling with whether or not they're Black or not in this day, it's kind of disappointing. But I literally had to catch myself because I was going back and forth with her, and I really know that the conversation needed to be with her parents.
Where does that come from?
I was thinking about adults, to be honest with you, because I think kids are who we are. I know kids who are Blacker than 1,000 Midnights and still would tell you that they're not African. So I'm not even talking about a skin tone. I'm talking about an identity. You could know who you are as an African person or as a Black person, or whatever, and buy as much hair as you want. I don't really care. But it's something in the way, and I'm just being honest, I think it's because even our hair is political. Like, you having locks don't make you no more African than somebody who got straight hair. Like, let's just throw that in the trash. But there is something about an identity, because we can look at all the other groups. They can go through as many different changes, but at the end of the day, they know who they really are.
Yeah, I can say, like I said, growing up in the Bay is very different than being here, in other places. And the folks with locks, deep, been years. And when I came to Sacramento, and I was like, oh, I mean, it was very different. The idea, the folks that I saw, I mean, it was I won't say, I mean, because there's some, it's not necessarily a trendy thing, but it just the ideology was different than what I grew up. It meant a certain, like, okay, I've been in, the move, they knew the meaning of locks, they knew how to take care of them, they knew, you know what I mean? It was those were the folks that were doing the naturalists, things before that was trendy. They were the vegans, before that they were the first Black vegans. Well, not if you go all the way back to the root. But I mean, there was a different culture, to use that word, than there is now. And so it's like more identity. So now you start to see other people with locks and, trying to find out. I mean, there are young people now that are trying to find out, as you know, what that means and what locking, means for identity, to use that word. So there's an education there going on too. I mean, there's folks that do that. Akilah Hatchett, I remember back in the day when she and Straight Out Scribes back in the day. That's how I think I met them when they were doing their poetry. But they did a natural hair symposium back in the day. I say back in the day because 20 years. But 20 years ago, they were doing that, and she had what was it called before? The business she had in Midtown. Say it again.
Kinks International.
Kinks International. That's right. Thank you. And now she has crowns. And so even that, the names speak to an understanding. That, like I said, I've had the pleasure of doing stories on these women who share, why they do certain things and the identity, and sometimes how it places you, counterculture. We started saying you have a business right in, downtown, Midtown, called Kinks International, While you have, you know, Black women saying, oh no, you have to have, you know, the straight hair. How come, you know, there's women who start taking their kids, you know, to the salon when they're like 4 or 5 years old, you know, and that's ingrained in them. So when your children don't, you know, there's a problem, you know, and so I think that's a problem. But, you know, there are people who are, you know, saying, hey, look, no, there's beauty in this, you know, and why does it take all of that? Why does it take a bill in California to say the Crown Act to say, oh, I can wear it and not get in trouble at work?
That's real
It's
talk.
crazy.
Miss Faye, you was gonna say something, Sister Faye? You're muted.
I'm muted.
No, Faye, Faye. I think she was saying, yeah, we can't hear her. Faye is muted. Hold on, she gonna get her earbuds back in. I think she gonna get her. No.
Like I said, Faye is rarely muted.
Okay, is that better?
Here you go. That's
Okay.
me.
So I think the whole identity is because in this culture and in the global culture is how Africa is portrayed and viewed. And that it's portrayed and viewed, maybe not about those of us who are on this program. We see it as our homeland, motherland, but for the vast majority of us, we saw Africa through the lens of Tarzan and on mass media, and it was viewed as very negative. And so it's like we've had to come to grips with that. It's like, you know, the whole dynamic between African Americans and African, how we have to continue that dialogue, and the whole issue of colorism. These are issues that I think will be ongoing issues in our community, because with that, the crux of it is capitalism. It's capitalists went to our home motherland and raided it. And it's beginning to raid not only the motherland, but it's raiding folks in Central America, South America. It's capitalism is a mean, pernicious animal. And I think people need to understand that. And because capitalism controls the mass media, it controls what looks important and how they define beauty, how they define hair. All of that is all tied to how we view ourselves as people, as Black women, Black men, and all of that. And I think we just need to understand that. And that's why I think it's so important that there's the Observer, there's this show, there's a Talking Drum. There's so many ways we're documenting our history, because if we don't, someone else will, and they're not going to tell the truth. They go tell it from their own view. And even within the Black community, you know, we could be looking at the same thing, but we're going to see it differently based on our perceptions and where we come from.
Right on. Go ahead, Mama Michelle.
Okay, I was not
No, you
in
good.
agreement. But this is something that crystallized for me. I'm hearing echo too.
You hear echo?
I'm hearing it really bad. But anyway, I was trained as a physician. I was in a whole different country, going to deal with a patient. And this patient responded to me and just like, you know, like you don't want me to touch him. It didn't have a darn thing to do with any boxes that I check. I'm this check or that check. It had everything to do with the fact that I was an African woman. He didn't know what country I was from. He didn't know anything about me but my presentation. I'm an African. And it kind of crystallized that thing for me. I mean, I don't hyphenate it or anything. I don't have any objection to people who do. But for me, my identity is irrevocably, irretrievably, deeply connected to the fact that I have people who came over, my ancestors came over to do a specific chore for some other people. They were snatched and grabbed and brought here. Some of them got dropped off along the way in other places.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that ties us all together is that we're African ancestral. That's who I am. that's, that's how I'm perceived. That's who I love. That's my identity.
Mhm.
And I don't fight with people about it, because I remember when we were little kids. I don't know if you remember. There was a little sing song. I'm not a N-word. I'm a Negro.
Mhm.
When I become an N-word, I'll let you know. I mean, that was our way of fighting back against that. And then we had other little sing song games later on. But it was always about trying to find that one identity that we held on to that would really, strengthen and fortify us. And that's who I am. That's what does it for me. And that's what
I just say, at the Observer, every newspaper has their style, how they do things, how they, in type, how they do things. That's called your style. And so our style is not to hyphenate the word African American. We capitalize the word Black.
Mhm.
And so, and people have asked, why do you do that? That's not how, that's not, style. That's not, the way, it's like, why do I have to, justify who I choose to be? You know what I mean? And that's how, I choose to be capitalized, because why we capitalize different things. We capitalize names, and, I'm not a hyphenated people. So, the previous publisher, owner of the paper, God rest his soul, William Lee, Dr. Lee. When I started 20 years ago, almost 21 years ago, and they lay out, this is our style, we're going to roll with it. And so, I don't have a problem with that. Like I said, other people have questioned that. And I just say, hey, we have a right to define ourselves. And that's what we do.
Does any of this have to do with freedom? And what is your ideal of freedom?
I mean, to me, freedom is, saying this is who I am, and, unapologetically. And so, I wouldn't say necessarily defiance, but it is a freedom to be able to identify myself, say, hey, this is who I am, this is who I'm going to be. You can choose to go with it or not. There's a freedom in that. There's a freedom in being able to tell, as Faye said, the many different stories. There's a freedom to me in being a member of the Black press. It means something that, there was a time when, I mean, as we all know, there was a time when Black people, couldn't read or write. You couldn't express yourself. You mentioned your talking drums, Faye. The drums, that's significance. When I see that newsletter, I know it. The drum, when we talk through the drums, the history is, when folks were coming over on the ships, and they had the different, the languages, and because we were a varied people. And so that's how, folks started, the songs and the follow the drink and go, we had different ways of communicating, but the communication, like I said, at one time was considered wrong because they knew there was freedom in that. You know what I mean? If we could find a way to communicate, there was going to be a different way of doing things. And so that's why I think we were kept, tried to be, kept ignorant in that respect. I use that word, not our word. That's not our word, because we had languages before, English was our language. We had, obviously ways we figured out how to do it, didn't we? And so to use the constellations and all that good stuff. But, again, there was a freedom. We knew that we weren't supposed to be, my computer keeps going. We weren't supposed to be what you wanted us to be. We talk about capitalism. I mean, ultimate. But so there's a freedom for me when I write, when I go out. And we call it classically trained, meaning I went to journalism school.
Yeah.
And so I think that, I was taught to stand toe to toe. I mean, meaning, journalistically, I can go in any situation and hold my own. Now, there have been times when, I was talking to my colleague the other day. And so there have been times when we go to things and we get questioned, that's for, that's for media. If you request a media pack or a press kit, this is for journalists. This is for the press. I can't read, sweetheart. I know. So just hand over. I'm telling you that I am you know what I mean? Or even, showing your credentials and they get questioned because you're, no, for no other reason than you're Black. And I think that's another reason why I keep at it, because it's been hard over the years, but that's another reason I keep at it. Why can't I be a journalist? Why can't I be? And I didn't see these things necessarily when I was a kid. Again, I grew up in West Oakland. We had the Tribune. And you found out that one of the editors was a Black man, Bob Maynard. That was a pride there. And as you see other Black journalists doing, their thing. Back in the Bay, we had Faith Fancher, we had Belva Davis, we had Dennis Richmond, and you would see them on the news, and you'd be like, oh my God, you know what I mean? Like it like you said, seeing ourselves. When people say, oh, people don't see themselves, teachers, you have to see yourselves as, the attorneys, and in some ways, you see police officers that look like you. You didn't see a lot, but the few that you had, you took pride in. And again, there's a freedom in that, because I could see years later, you know what I mean? I'm following in this tradition. I'm learning what I need to know to do, and it's like I just happened to, go into a situation where I work for the Black media. But I've seen, I go out to press conferences, where the police are saying, different things. I go out to the Capitol, and so I was educated to do, whatever the situation is, whether I'm covering things in the Black community or doing things where we're doing stories about the Black interest or not, to educate. And I think I do see things from a different lens because of my own background. And there's a freedom in, like I said, telling our stories, and there's always another story to tell, something you haven't heard, or something I think people haven't heard. And even with the protests that are going on, there's different aspects, there's different roots to it, because of what people bring from their own, what we call in journalism, their own frame of references. So there's many voices, and so I think that's the beauty of it.
Right on. Anybody want to add on to your idea of what you think freedom is for you?
Wow. That's such a great question. I was thinking about it when you said that. To me, freedom is being able to think your own thoughts and to express yourself, just like Genoa was saying. Freedom is being able to do whatever you want to do, when you feel like doing it. Of course, we have a responsibility, a lot of us, to lift up the culture, but to just be free of, just to be who we are, unapologetic, free from ridicule. To me, that's what freedom is. Freedom is also to not be affected or impacted by oppressive people and systems, if that makes sense.
Okay.
I know there's a difference. You can have oppressive people, and then you can have a big system. So yeah, that's what freedom feels like. That word even feels good and liberating.
I was just thinking about, I don't know if you remember that song Common did many years ago, Song for Asada. And then there's a quote that, there's actually a segment where she says freedom. She ponders that word. I don't know what freedom is. She goes on a little minor soliloquy about what freedom means to her. She's not quite sure. And I honestly sort of feel the same way. I kind of have some ideas of the contours of it, but I struggle trying to figure out what a free Africans in this country would look like. Or would we be in this country? Those are the kinds of like existential things I'd be questioning. Sometimes they wake me up early in the morning. Like, what am I going to do now? So I'm sorry I don't have an answer to that freedom, but I'd like to explore what the possibilities are, and be unapologetic about it. I feel Like that was the word that was the thread for me.
I agree with you. So here's the freedom about even what you just said is that you felt free enough to say that.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
to freely say I don't have an answer. That's freeing in itself.
Well,
Because you know sometimes people want you to have an answer.
one damn about a lot. You will say whatever with very few filters and just dare somebody to come up on you. I mean, really, that is freedom. Because my children will tell you, Mom, I'm like, look, hey, I'm just gonna say it, and because I don't feel as many restraints. What you gonna do? Fire me? What you gonna do? You know. I just feel that way, and I think some of that comes just to being in my age group right now. So, sorry, young people that still got to keep a job.
Thank you, Mama Michelle. What about you, Miss Faye Kennedy?
So for me, freedom, I look at it in terms of self-determination, that I can determine my own destiny, and that what Michelle was talking about. So I've been retired a little over 10 years now. And so that has been so liberating. So when Dr. Colvin and Dr. Scott and different ones who retired, and they said that they don't have to worry about certain things, that uh, they have this new energy to create. It didn't make sense to me, but retired, I have so much creative energy. Sometimes it gets me in trouble, but
Yes.
but I am able to do so many more things because I'm not bound by dealing with those microaggressions that I had to deal with when I was on the JOB. But that's not to say I'm not dealing with other microaggressions. But you know, when you're on your JOB, you got to stay calm so you don't won't do certain things to lose
You don't
your
get
job.
arrested.
Right. Um, but it's allowed me to be much more creative, to engage people more, to use my creativity to try to make life a little bit better for folks. So that's why I got involved with the Poor People's Campaign. That's why I'm doing much more work with the Sacramento Area Black Caucus. So freedom for me is able to determine what I'm going to do with my life, and then how am I going to use my life to make the people I come in contact with a little bit better. And so at 65, if I don't want to do something, I don't do it. So, like my girlfriend said, well, doesn't it bother you have gray hair? I said, uh-uh. These are my beauty streaks, these are my wisdom streak, and that what you see is what you get. So when I wake up in the morning, if I don't want to put on no bra, I don't put on no bra.
Hello.
Oh, wow. There's
Oh
a
no,
group
can't do that.
that makes
You know, I was thinking the same thing.
because I dye my hair, Miss Faye Kennedy. And that is so freeing to just here I am.
Hey,
when
just let it go.
So when I go on vacation and I want to swim, I don't have to worry about a hair dryer. I take a little hair conditioner. I have liberated myself from things that I used to worry about. I don't have to worry about that. I'm just free of that. And so it has been, and I don't worry about it. I don't spend a lot of money on hair products, y'all. I tell you.
Hey,
Yeah.
Hey.
Okay.
I was all the way there with you till you said no bra. I just can't.
Okay.
I
My
know.
whole back would be messed up.
Yeah, we're working with different situations.
Yeah, different
Well,
situations going on.
I'm
I
not.
was like, yeah, like
That part.
no, but and one of these days, I don't know, I just think that's so funny. That is freeing though, for real. When you don't have to, they say if a black woman come home and take her bra off, she's not going nowhere else. Like just do it, relax.
That's a relief.
Take the bra off.
Yeah.
It's done. So we're coming up on the 4th of July. What is the difference between the 4th of July and Juneteenth? Let me tell you why this is important. Because we, as Mama Faye said, we live in a capitalist society. In a minute, like they did Kwanzaa, they're gonna figure out how to capitalize on Juneteenth, like it's the 4th of July, like they do Kwanzaa and Christmas. What is the difference between these two?
You're celebrating a country that oppressed not only folks of African descent, but depressed every group that it came in contact with. In Juneteenth, you're celebrating the liberation of Black folks who were once enslaved that got the message a year later that they were free, but they didn't get the message until a year later. So I think, once again, I think people don't always understand the history of Juneteenth and why we celebrate it, nor do I think our folks understand the history of the 4th of July as the All African People's Revolutionary Party talks about. So, if people want to celebrate the 4th of July, then that's fine. I just encourage them to really look it up. And if you think that as a person of African descent, that you're treated with the same dignity and respect as your white brothers and sisters, then celebrate it. But if you don't think you're treated that way, then maybe you need to find another way to celebrate it. I celebrated 4th of July one year by having everything decorated in lime green. And when my daughter brought her friends home, they said, "Oh Lord, this woman is crazy as hell," because everything was lime green. It wasn't red, white, and blue. It was lime green.
What's the significance of blue, sis?
The lime, I love lime green.
Wow.
And when I went to the store, it was like really cheap.
Okay.
Okay.
Because she didn't want you to go.
Right on.
Lime green.
Well, what I do generally is print the speech by Frederick Douglass.
Yes.
I share that.
Just give it to my young people, whichever young people come by. I mean, and if we have to go to on, it's an attraction, and but generally we don't celebrate that at all. It's anathema, as far as I'm concerned. But interesting, I didn't learn about Juneteenth until much later in my development. And when I did, many of my relatives in the South knew about it, but I didn't know much. Are you hearing the feedback? Because I am. So anyway, I learned about Juneteenth as a college student. In Chicago, we celebrated this thing called Bud Billiken, which I didn't understand what the hell that was for a long time. I just I like a good parade, so I went. But it's not that's a non sequitur. It's not related to Juneteenth, but it was something that since you're talking about Black newspapers, it was something that the Black newspaper, the Chicago Defender, and its publisher created. He just created this whole celebration for Black folks, whole cloth, and created this little Black mascot called Bud Billiken. It had some roots in some Southern, I don't know, probably some African mythology about this little totem, this little figure, the Billiken, who is a protector of Black children. But that kind of obscured and it happens around the same time as Juneteenth, like in the summer. So I don't know. There's a whole group of kids from Chicago who didn't know a daggone thing about Juneteenth, and that's a travesty. I'm glad it's gaining in popularity. I'm glad people are beginning to really understand the history of Juneteenth. My relatives from Texas are really fierce supporters of Juneteenth because it really happened. It went down there. Mm-hmm. So they're the ones who are really like the keepers of that particular bit of Black history. And they've kind of spread it. They've managed to, in fact, to the point where in Philly now there's a Juneteenth. There probably won't be this year because of COVID, but there's a big parade, a Juneteenth parade, which is pretty cool. I still think we need a lot of education.
Right on. I know that this year, like last year, I'll be in Lake Charles, thanks to Javon. And in Lake Charles, they do a whole week of activities around Juneteenth, around healthcare, economics, the whole thing around Juneteenth. But what they did last year, what they're going to do this year, they have a firework display for Juneteenth. And last year when I went, that was the first time they did it in Lake Charles. It was a whole nother story, but it got done. That was such a different feeling watching those fireworks and what those fireworks meant to us. than watching some stuff on the 4th of July. I don't even watch fireworks. I mean, if I happen to see it, I'm like, oh yeah. But there was something about, because when I had video, when they were shooting off, black folks were yelling, and it was just so beautiful. Because sometimes, to me, being Black in America, you get to discover all of this awesome stuff that people never wanted you to know about yourself. And then once you learn it, you have to live in it. Like, it's like you thinking you were a peasant, and then you find out you were the queen. Now you got to make sure you be the queen, because you can't really be the peasant, because you're not a peasant no way. That, to me, that's how I liken that feeling. It's like, we the baddest thing smoking. You can't tell me nothing about Black folks. But that's just me. Anybody else want to share what freedom of Juneteenth for you? Do you do anything in particular for Juneteenth? That's my mother's birthday, by the way, too. So
Happy.
I celebrate for real.
That's my dad's birthday too, bro. June 19th.
June 19th is my mama's birthday.
That's my dad's birthday.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I don't do anything special for Juneteenth. I will take off work if I have to work. And the reason why is because, like you said, in Texas, it's actually a holiday. Like, it's actually an off day for them. And so I will take off work. But, unless it falls on an African Marketplace Day, truth be told and just being honest, I don't do anything really special. But I plan to do something this year.
Right on.
So Juneteenth in Sacramento has a long history. So the Black Caucus for many years celebrated and commemorated Juneteenth with events in Miller's Park, and the Observer chronicled that. And prior to that, one of our members, who's now deceased, Mr. Willie Jones, talked about when he was a young a student at Sac High in the 40s and 50s, about how they would celebrate it by cutting school and going to Miller's Park, or going to what we call Negro Bar in Folsom. So Sacramento has a long history of celebrating Juneteenth. And I know when the caucus stopped celebrating it and putting on the programs in Miller's Park, other organizations, about 10 years, no one would step up and continue the work, because it was quite expensive, because you had to have liability insurance and all of this. And so Gary Simon picked it up about 5 or 6 years ago and continued it. And I see now that there's a lot of Juneteenth celebrations that are going to be online using Zoom, or probably using the platform that we're using now. So I think it's one of those holidays that I think we need to continue it. If we don't do public celebrations, we do family celebrations, we do smaller community celebrations, and really help the community understand the history about it, because it is a very liberating holiday that you could do a whole history lesson on the history of Juneteenth and why we should celebrate it, and why did it take a whole year before those enslaved ancestors to find out, and everything. So
I think Juneteenth should remind us all that we should never take reparations off the table. But that's just me.
Never.
When I think about somebody working even another year, I mean, and then just there's so many different things, like the Devil's Punch Bowl. I could just go on down the line with all of the things that have happened. Reparations should always be on the table for me. And so with that being said, how do you honor your African Black ancestry, your ancestors? How do you honor them?
I fight the struggle every single day. Every single day. I engage in some serious struggle, because I think right now in this country and globally that we're all at risk of losing our self-determination, because we have people in power at the local level, at the state level, and definitely in the White House, who just insist on trying to take our freedoms from us. So, if people go to my Facebook page right now, you'll see I am angry because our city council and mayor voted unanimously in March to appropriate over $400,000 for a military tank. So can you imagine what we could have done with that money? How many unhoused people we could have housed? How much water we could have brought for those unhoused folks? How many folks who needed assistance with their rent, where they wouldn't become unhoused? How many young people we could have helped with summer jobs? Or just think about how much we could have done with $400,000. And the point I was trying to make to brothers and sisters is that when they buy that type of military weapon, they're not going to roll that down Greenhaven. They're not going to roll that up into the Fabulous 40. They're not going to roll that up into Farrell's Boulevard. They're going to roll that into Meadowview, Oak Park, Glen Elder. They're going to roll it up into my neighborhood, into our neighborhood. So I'm just real angry. And they wonder why folks take to the street. So I try to fight the struggle every single day. Every single day. Because you know what? We all need to be sleeping in shifts and working in shifts. Because the devil is happy.
Right on. Anybody else want to share how they honor their ancestors every day?
I try to bring a next generation. I'm on the third generation. People who understand who they are, why they're here, what their struggle is going to be. You know, each of them individually have to choose their own course. But fundamentally, I believe that they know who they are, you know, and why they're on this planet, and that their ultimate goal is for us to have something for ourselves. And now I have grandkids that I'm trying to do the same thing. I'm not their primary teacher, but I can have an influence on them. And I try to be, just an all-around good African to other African people. And I try to do the work that I think I was gifted to do. And I'm honoring my ancestors in that way, I think. And I hope that I am.
Right on. Dana or Genoa?
I think, I honor my elders and my ancestors, by, speaking out, against things when we see things chronicling, the good and the bad. We have here at home, I have conversations sometimes deeper than I ever thought, but talking to, my child about, where we've been and, how now it's, her generation's, responsibility to carry that, and what, sometimes they see things differently than we do, because, you always say, your kids are supposed to have better than you. You're supposed to give your children better than you. And sometimes the struggle to do that is a struggle. But they're in school situations that we aren't in. They have opportunities that we never had, because of, better financial situations. Sometimes, they live in different neighborhoods. They go to schools with people of other races. And I think what I've given my child is the opportunity to, when comments are made in school, you can say, hey, no, that's not right. And here's the real. I think that's how you honor, by giving that history, that knowledge, and helping, move that forward. We're still here. You know what I mean? So we have a responsibility to still be here. That doesn't mean be silent. That doesn't mean hide in the cut. You know what I mean? That means, I'm visible. We were talking the other day, my child and I, we were talking about the difference between slaves and indentured servants. I can't hide. This brown is brown. And so, as you go forward, into my kid is a member of the class of 2020, and that came with a whole bunch of, issues. But, we were out taking pictures in her cap and gown. And she was, she wore both the stole that she got from her school and the stole she got for winning the caucus scholarship. Thank you, Ms. Mike. And so she was very proud to wear the stole that came with that from the Culture Collection, Miss Betty. We frequent her a lot. And she was very proud. Most of the pictures she was wearing that stole. because she knows that, you know, she's a Black student. You know what I mean? She knows that going forward, you know, she has a responsibility to the community, you know, to further, you know, being, you know, Black wherever she goes. She's going to a UC. You know, people say, oh, why didn't she go to HBCU? That wasn't her. You know what I mean? And so where she's going to go, she's going to be Black, historically Black. And so I think, you know, that responsibility is how, you know, we honor, you know, teaching your kids who they are and the skin that they're in. You know what I mean? And so there are parents who, you know, who are taking their kids to the protest, and people say, oh, why are you doing that? That's an education. I had a conversation with Miss Faye, you know, who gives you a different, you know, perspective. She said she grew up in it. You know what I mean? And so that's how, you know, people honor that. You're saying, hey, we can't take this anymore. We can't, you know, some people say we never took it, you know, but people didn't listen to us. So it's like, you know, education to me is a real big key in that. And as I said earlier, there's some things I didn't know, you know, until growing into, you know, adulthood, and you start learning for yourself. I'm on my child's computer. But you start learning things about yourself, and you have to seek things out for yourself. We say never let the education system, traditional education system, be your only child's education. It's like, because you say, hey, they're not teaching this, they're not teaching this. I was like, but you send your kids to every day. So you have to supplement. Sometimes you have to go there and talk to your teacher, say, hey, you know, they got this you know, ethnic studies, but Black folks is only one day, 1 week. I was like, you know what I mean? But these kids are Black every day. So it's like, you can't rely on that, you know? And it's like, so yeah, hey, they got that, but you can't rely just on that. So you seek out, you know, as you get older, you know, you have Dana, you know, you have your Round the Way girls and your the Boys in the Hood book club. They reading books about themselves. You see what I'm saying? It's like you seek knowledge. That's why I'm an avid reader. You know, my child's an avid reader. We have books. You know, it's like, learn about who you are. And we do write our own stories. That's another reason why that's important. Because the history, they give these children books that have, you know, outdated. They had, I'll give you an example. They had a picture. My daughter had a book, and it had a picture of Lauryn Hill. Lauryn Hill. It was like the picture was from, you know, it was like 20 years ago. The kids don't know, you know what I mean? I was like, oh yeah, that's L Boogie. And she's like, who? And I'm like, wait a minute, Lauryn Hill. Then she knew who Lauryn Hill was. But the picture, but my point is, it's outdated information. And yeah, you have textbooks, you go and make them so, you know, but it's like, you can supplement. I remember my teachers back in the day, we called them dittos, because they used to have us, you know, printing them out. They would supplement things. They would supplement, you know, that's not in the book, but here it is. You see what I'm saying? It's like, you can do that if you want to. Some folks don't want to.
Yeah. For me, how I honor my ancestors, it's just in my own little small way. Like, I push literacy. So I try to I consider myself honoring my ancestors by doing that and working with young people. But if I'm honest with myself, there's a lot more that I can do. I feel like I really want to walk the path of my ancestors, and I really want to study and learn about them more. Like, we walk well, not we, me. I walk around like I'm Black, I'm African, but truth be told, I've never even been to Africa. And that's something that I definitely want to do. I want to do that. And I want to just get more civically engaged and do what I can do from my small little square. So there's definitely more that I can do.
Right on. I was going to say, for Genoa, I've watched a lot of parents now making plans not to send their kids back to public school because of this COVID. They got some courage from that they can really be teaching their own children.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that to me is a humongous step for those who can do that, because there's a lot of sacrifice involved when you do that. But when you think about your children, and if they're your best thing ever, you know, I watch people get a new car and they won't let certain people even sit in the new car. So your child is definitely much more valuable than the car. So if you think about what people are putting into them, I watched COVID help some people make a decision like, I'm not sending my kid back to school.
Mm-hmm.
This whole little time has helped me to realign myself and give my kids a better start than I had, because maybe my mom couldn't afford to homeschool. So it's been beautiful watching people find the information and the resources to do that. As we wrap up, ladies, the last question I'm going to ask you is it possible for those of us in the diaspora, now I'm talking about the US, to reconnect to Africa? Or is that important or not?
So yes, I think we can connect with the homeland, but we can also connect with those brothers and sisters who are from the continent that are right here in Sacramento. So in Sacramento, there's a large African community, and many of them work at Sac State either as professors or their staff. Many of them have their organizations that are comparable to like the Black Caucus or the NAACP, and many of them have yearly celebrations, particularly around the year that the country was founded independent. So for me, I got a chance to get to know the Rwandan community from Dr. Kabinyi, who was a professor at Sac State, who's now passed, who died in 2010. So I got to know him and his family and his community right around the time of the genocide. And I got a chance to see firsthand their resilience, being at their home when they got word that they had lost collectively 25 family members were murdered. I was so traumatized that I ran out the house, and I don't know how I got to my house, but I couldn't even be there to support them. But they called me up and wanted to make sure I was okay. So I think we can get to know our brothers and sisters right here in Sacramento, build relationships with them, and then prepare ourselves to make that trip to the homeland, whether it's to Africa, whether it's to Jamaica, whether it's to the South, because the largest group of Black folks outside the continent of Africa is in Brazil. And Sacramento has a well-known expert on Brazil, Dr. Colvin. And Sacramento hosted in the year 2000 the largest international conference in the United States, where he brought Brazilians and Black folks together. So I think that's one pathway for us. And then we can connect people to Jerry Scott from Sac City, who takes folks to the continent all the time.
And so there's Takara and Tia Thompson, West to West. So those are some young folks taking you. So it's there. Anybody else? I want to hear from everybody. Do you think that's possible? And some, I just want to know.
I think before we go and make connections, educate ourselves. Because I don't know, I'm not sitting in judgment, but I remember watching carefully the trip this what's her name?
Cardi B, yeah.
She was in Africa, and I just remember being on pins and needles the whole time, and she was just going, just clown. I just was worried. I'm not judging this sister. I think that I applaud her, wanting to go and to try to establish something. But please, we need to learn a little before we just jump over to Africa and try to, because oftentimes I've seen it. We go over there and we bring our old ugly American ways. We behave as if we're white people over there in Africa. We forget who we are fundamentally, and I just want us to prepare ourselves before we go. And then to learn over here, to reach out to communities, African communities, is a sound.
Right on.
Do that.
Right on. I was going to say, I know that Sister Imaka's she owns One Africa. This is on the Cape Coast of Ghana. Her resort is in between the Elmina Castle and I forgot flew right out, the real famous one just flow out my mind. And one of the things I learned about the times that I've traveled to Africa, because I've been a few times already now, usually people who go and stay are not Cardi B's. Like, these are people who really are so sick of America that they just going. That's why Amicus told me. She was like, I mean, I met a few. They have a whole on that whole coast. There's nothing but diaspora Africans who have repatriated back to Ghana. Yeah, and so there's people, Black people from Britain and United States and Canada, and people who went back to Ghana, and those were people who were like, look, I've been getting screwed all my life in other countries. You can't tell me nothing about them going screwed. It can nothing be worse than what I've been through. So
But
usually those are people who are not coming with their luxuries. They ain't coming bringing Burger King. They ain't coming bring. They like, we coming to build. And normally sometimes they feel even more Africans than the Africans that are there. Because I've had that experience of meeting Africans who wanted me, who thought I was Oprah or thought I was, like something like a Real Housewives of Atlanta. No, seriously, because they get fed that same propaganda as if that's our reality. And then they meet me and be like, well, why are you dressing like that when I'm trying to dress like what I think you are?
This is my point about Cardi B, that she gets attention. She's an influencer for whatever reason, and and so if she behaves badly, it gets amplified in ways that are very detrimental. And that's my
no. I agree. I agree. No, I agree with you. I'm just saying I feel like, and I said Oprah, I mean like in terms of like Oprah's being rich and everybody think all African Americans, they don't have no idea what happened to us. No idea why my name is Rolanda and that's German. Like they don't really have an idea. But what I come to understand, even with the Cardi B's, when you have been thrown into wherever you've been and you show back up to your adopted parents, they don't get to say what's wrong with you. They either get to deal with you, because that's what it all is. I mean, there's some of them are more educated than we are. So they have their ignorant people. We got our ignorant people. I deal with a lot of Africans right here in Sacramento. That you said that it's a large Ghanaian community. There's a large Liberian community. There's always Nigerians. 1 out of every 5 Africans is a Nigerian. So they are everywhere, literally. There are people here from all, because Africa's a continent. So there's Africans from dang near everywhere in Sacramento. But what I find with them, and in my truth, is that they go along and they start building with each other because they have a common goal. It don't mean that they don't like you, but if they come from a war-torn country, they don't quite understand what our issues are. So like in Yuba City, there's a large Liberian community in Yuba City that is building something for themselves. I'm not mad at them. I'm not saying, hey, I got to be included, but I understand why they're doing it. And so we got to, I say people show, if you end up in Africa, you could think it's an accident, but it probably really isn't. So Cardi B, as much as she get past all the superficial, she'll have her come to whatever meeting she needs to have. Because, when you can't get those lights on, or depending on where you out in the country and you ain't in the big city, that's very different. That's very different than not having air conditioning. That's very different when you go to those dungeons, which some of them are still say castles. They're not castles to me. They're dungeons to me. And I call them just what they are. So it's kind of like, I think there's room for it, but I think we got to have some conversations if it's allowed. I don't try to make people understand where I'm coming from, but I have to let them know I'm coming. I belong to the people who were taken away. So I come back with because Black people, when some of us go to those dungeons, we have a whole different experience. The Ghanaians be looking at us like, what's wrong with y'all? They have no idea. But I'm not mad at them. That ain't their story. You know what I mean? So I'm right there with you. But I think even with Cardi B, even though I was like, oh, Lord, she going to bring the ratchetness. Let me tell you something. They watching the ratchetness. Don't get it twisted. And after a while, Cardi B will start to understand, like, maybe me being a stripper ain't going to work out here. Because they have a whole community that ain't going to put up with that.
Let's hope.
Okay.
Let's hope.
What about you, David?
I was gonna say also, I have issue, Cardi B, and the use of the N-word and all that. But we have to remember, she is the mother of a Black child. She needs to educate herself on what, the real deal is, so that you can tell your kid who she is. She has a child named Culture, I believe. So yeah, that gets real in that sense. But I think in terms of, relations between African Americans is continued conversation and exposure. Um, you can't learn to, our shared history. You can't learn, continued history if you're not exposed to each other, if you're not, communicating, with each other. And so a lot of times, the narrative is, oh, Africans don't get along with African Americans. I was like, I mean, that's not necessarily the whole story. And so for some people, it's not the story at all. So it's like again, controlling your narrative and trying to do something, about it. I was watching a video earlier on my phone, and they were asking the young lady, I believe she's a rapper, but they were asking her the difference between, like, does she prefer Haitian food or Jamaican food? And her boyfriend had a whole, he's like, no, Haitian food, and she's like, no, I like both. And it's like exposure. And in some places, exposure is better. I know people who grew up in New York, and they're like, okay, the culture is different there, and so you have, the Dominicans, you have African, you said Nigeria. There's more, and there's more exposure. Sometimes, in the communities that we live in, we don't have the restaurants. We don't have, and a lot of times food is a bridge, can be a bridge, but we don't have that. Or we have a few, after COVID, I will be going back to the Dove Plate Kitchen. Thank you very much. We have a few, but as you know, a lot of times it's that one. You know what I mean? And everybody knows that one to go to, or that the two or few. It's like, imagine if we had, more. And there's opportunities. We go to one of our favorite restaurants, Queen Sheba. It's not for everybody. Sometimes, the stomachs, older people may not be able to, stomach some of the. We love it, but again, exposure to that. And there's a few I learned from another African American gentleman. There's another one that I'll be trying. But again, it's like we just have to expose ourselves and have conversations with each other.
That's real talk. There's a Nigerian restaurant on Northgate too. I bet
you. Okay, what's the name of it?
Very good.
What's the name of it?
I can't remember the name of it, but it's not. If you type in Nigerian restaurant, it will come up immediately. The food is so good.
Everything. I'm gonna find it.
Yeah. It is. As a matter of fact, they're right next to like a Mexican supermarket. So I've gone there several times, and every time I go there, it's full of Africans. See what I'm saying? From the continent.
It's on Northgate.
Northgate Boulevard.
Y'all making lunch plans? We ain't got none of that.
I'm sorry. But I'm just saying, like, even in Sacramento, like that's a Nigerian restaurant. It's just the food is delicious. So anyway, what about you, Dana?
So I'm going to tell you, what was the original question?
Do you think there's a room for African Americans or diaspora Africans and Africans from the continent to work together to bridge some gaps, to be together?
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. I absolutely. I'm hearing an echo now too on me. I absolutely think that there is room for that. We get to kind of, I would say, build a rapport with other African people from the continent through the African marketplace and working with them. And so that's been a great thing for us. I would say that we need to do more of it, because while we do have a rapport with a lot of them, I still feel like there is, at least for me and my experience, that there's a bit of a barrier, right? There's a bit of a little bit of energy, and I don't know if it's real or perceived, but it's something that I feel that there is a barrier between us. Like we don't, I don't know. I don't feel like I get as close to them or some of them as I do with African Americans. And I don't know if it's unfamiliarity. I don't know exactly what that energy is, but I know I would like to dismantle that energy and to continue to build with them and to build a closer bridge. I hope that makes sense. And I'm just
I think that was very honest.
Just telling the truth.
Yeah, I think that's very honest, because it, I think when you're trying to get to know someone, you have to be honest about what it is that keep you from doing it. You know what I mean? You got to start somewhere. One of the things I did learn from my elders who are now ancestors, is they were saying, don't lie to yourself. Don't just take a line because it's popular, but you know you don't agree with it. And I have watched a lot of Black people do that. Like that, taking it for the team attitude. I don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Because then I leave not getting what I came for, you know, and then we have this perception that it's all good and it's not all good. But once you clear the air, it's like if you get the work done, then the rest of the stuff will be like butter, or it won't be as difficult. But if you don't take care of those things in the beginning, through the course of your relationship, it'll just keep showing up, but the lumps will be bigger.
Yeah.
And falling out will be greater. So I want to thank you all for joining us today on Sunday Sit with Sis. This was a great conversation. I'm so grateful to just be sitting here talking with you all, such different perspectives. But I think also that's what makes it African people or Black people, is that we're not a monolith. And I know I say that a lot, but I think you just gotta, I think sometimes that can be used as a tool against us, and then people leave and don't feel like they've been heard. So you could be out of one come many. I think that's what Jamaicans, that's their motto, out of one come many. And so I feel like that's us. You know, though I'm not Jamaican, but I love the saying. So thank y'all so much for joining us today, and we'll be back again next week. Thank you, ladies.
Before you go,
Oh, no, go ahead.
could
Yeah,
we share information? Because I'd like to not lose track of any of these sisters.
No, go ahead, please. So she said, because y'all share your information, and the answer is yes. So do y'all see something on your screen that says comments, like not private chat?
Yeah, I see private chat.
Put your information in there.
Oh, I don't see that. All I see, oh, private chat. Okay. I'm slow. Okay.
And if y'all put that in there, then that way you can see everybody's information. Also, all of you all are on Facebook, by the way.
Yeah, I guess.
All of y'all are on Facebook. I love Facebook.
Yeah, is that where you found that picture?
Yes. I was searching. I like the picture. I love the picture. I was like,
No, that was from when we did our breast cancer fundraiser.
I loved it. I just thought it was so awesome. So anyway, families, hold on. Don't nobody go anywhere. I'm just gonna sign off, but y'all hang on, okay? Let me just get it signed out of here with my theme music. All right, family, thank you for joining us on Sunday Sit with Sisters. Please subscribe to us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at the Earth Mama Network. See you next week, family.
Peace.